Welcome back to Talking History, the channel where we dig deep into the moments that shaped our world. I'm your host, and today we are stepping back to 12th century, to the dusty plains of North India, and to a battlefield called Tarain, and to one of the biggest what if questions in Indian history. What if the Rajputs had actually stood together? Could they have stopped Muhammad Ghori? Could the entire course of Indo-Islamic history have gone in a complete different direction? Let's find out. So, here is the situation. It's the late 1100. Muhammad Ghori, the ruler of Ghurrid Empire, is pushing eastwards from Afghanistan. He is hungry for conquest, and North India is in his sights. Now, standing between him and that goal are the Rajputs, some of the most fierce and proud warriors you will ever read about in history. We are talking about powerful kingdoms like the Chamanas under Prithviraj Chauhan, the Garhwalas, and the Solankis. These were not weak people, these were battle hardened kings with massive armies and centuries of military tradition behind them. And here's the thing, in 1191, they actually beat Gauri at the first battle of Tarain. Prithviraj pulled together a Rajput confederacy and crushed Gauri's army in a pitched battle. Gauri himself barely escaped with his life. So, the proof was right there. When the Rajputs came together, they could win. They had the numbers, they had the courage, and they had the capability. So, what went wrong just 1 year later? This is where the story gets really painful. After the big victory in 1191, the Rajput alliance basically fell apart. Everyone went home. The kings went back to their own kingdoms, back to their own rivalries, back to their own politics. There was no sustained effort to prepare for what was clearly coming, because Gauri was not going to just give up and go home forever. He was regrouping, rethinking, and coming back with a better plan, better strategy. Meanwhile, Prithviraj had enemies not just on the frontier but with his own world. Jayachandra of Kannauj, another powerful Rajput king, actually refused to support Prithviraj. They were old rivalries, old jealousies, and old grudges that mattered more to these kingdoms than the approaching storm. This is the tragedy at the heart of our story. The Rajputs did not lose in 1192 simply because Gauri was unbeatable. They lost because they couldn't get out of their own way. Now, let's give credit where it's due. Muhammad Ghori was not just lucky, he was a smart, adaptable commander leading a relatively centralized military force. His army moved fast, absorbed defeats, and came back stronger. In 1192, he returned to Tarain with a much larger army and a completely different strategy. He used step style tactics, feigned retreats, flanking cavalry attacks, constant mobility. These are the tactics that the Rajputs were not fully prepared to counter. While Prithviraj was leading an overstretched confederacy, Gauri was leading a tight, disciplined, centrally commanded force. That difference in institutional structure, not just numbers or bravery, it was decisive. Prithviraj lost the second battle of Tarain. He was captured and shortly after killed. And with that, the door to North India swung wide open. Within just a few years, the Delhi Sultanate was established and the political and cultural landscape of subcontinent changed forever. So now let's ask the question directly. What if the Rajputs had genuinely united? Not just for one battle, not just for temporary crisis allies, but as a real, coordinated long term defensive front. Think about it. If Jaichand and Prithviraj had set aside their rivalry and coordinated their armies, Gauri would have faced a two front war. If the Rajput kings had shared intelligence about Gauri's movement, built a shared logistics network, and agreed on a common strategy, they could have forced Gauri into a long and painful war of attrition. Gauri could not just concentrate his entire force on one kingdom if multiple kingdoms were pushing back simultaneously. His supply lines from Afghanistan were already stretched. A prolonged multi front campaign could have exhausted his army and his treasury. We already know cooperation was possible, 1191 proved that. The question is whether it could have been sustained, and that is the haunting part of the story. Here's what I think is the most important takeaway from all of this. The Rajputs were not defeated because they were inferior warriors or because their culture was somehow flawed. They were defeated because their political system was built for short term alliances and not for long term strategy unity. Gauri's emerging empire, on the other hand, was becoming more centralized and more strategically focused with every passing year. That gap, the gap in institutional strength, ultimately mattered more than the battlefield courage. This is a lesson that echoes across history. Honestly, it's always the bravest army that wins. It's often the most organized one. It's the one that can look beyond the next battle and think about the next decade. So, would North India have resisted Gauri? I genuinely believe that greater Rajput unity would have made conquest far more difficult, maybe delayed the Delhi Sultanate by decades, maybe even prevented it entirely. We will never know for sure, but history does not always turn on the biggest armies or the strongest swords. Sometimes it turns on whether rivals can look at each other and say, not today. First, let's deal with the real threat. That is the story of Tarain. That is the story of what might have been. And that's why we keep talking history. If you have enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves history as much as you do. I will see you in the next one. Keep questioning, keep learning. This is Talking the History signing off.